Thank you for joining us for the program From Seats to Screens, How COVID-19 Will Change the Sports and Entertainment Industry. Our first speaker is Mark Owens, a partner at Barnes & Thornburg in Washington, D.C. In addition to his role as chair of the firm's Finance, Restructuring, and Bankruptcy Department, Mark is also chair of the firm's National Motorsports team. Mark's passion for auto racing is manifest in his commitment to serving drivers, teams, sponsors, and industry constituents in the full array of commercial contract issues they face. Mark is also the current chair of the TerraLex Sports and Entertainment Industry Sector team. Our next speaker is Amelia Lynch, a partner at Lander & Rogers in Australia. Amelia is head of the firm's Sport and Leisure Group. She leads a strong team that advises a broad range of clients in the sport, leisure, and major events industries. Amelia advises sports organizations on legal, governance, risk management, and stakeholder relations. She works closely with board directors, CEOs, management and administrative staff, event operators, government, venue operators, lawyers, sporting clubs, athletes, consultants, and volunteers. Our next speaker is Marion Lingot, a partner at Fiducia Légale by Lamy in Lyon, France. She has experience in international law, including with issues in cinema and audiovisual law. She provides assistance to clients in international production companies and in particular foreign productions with a film, TV, or web shooting project in France.
Well, good morning or good afternoon to all, depending on where you're watching this session from. Today we have for you from the Sports and Entertainment Practice Group, what I would call a global presentation. So as you all can see, we have a very geographical and practice area diverse group today. And we're going to touch on sports and entertainment issues that we're seeing as a result of the current global pandemic. So I'll start with kind of some topics for the panel. And we know that today and in the past, much of sports and entertainment requires physical closeness, fans and spectators. So the first question to the panel, and I'll start with Marion, is how has COVID-19 changed the business model of sports or entertainment, given the current physical distancing and social distancing measures?
Today, for my part of activity, which is more the cinema, we don't have any theaters anymore, which can to see the films. So the only way to have the authors and the performers being paid and having their creation being shown is to have an access to the media, the digital media. So today we are trying to really help our clients, so producers, to get an access to the platforms, to the internet platforms. So that is the main change. It existed before, but now it is a real issue. And we have to help our client to have the fair contracts in order for them to have their creation being shown and being paid at the end. So it is a digital market, which is now the key issues and how we have to negotiate with them. So.
Amelia, what are you seeing in your practice?
Well, I think when the significance of the pandemic was first realised, many governing bodies cancelled events and seasons. And they also similarly, from what Marion was saying, were engaging with fans through virtual activity and digital platform. And that's still going on, but now also you can see the governing bodies starting to look ahead and see opportunity for recommencing. So in Australia, the Australian Football League, our Australian rules, and the National Rugby League, they're commencing their season over the next 2 weeks. That's involved working with state governments and federal governments, getting medical approvals, working with the player associations, clubs, venues, broadcasters, all to deliver matches without crowds. And they're the first leagues in Australia to be in a position to do that. Cricket Australia today announced a full schedule of cricket over the summer. So obviously we're coming up to our winter, so our summer will be at the end of the year. We have an ICC International Cricket T20 World Cup scheduled to be held in Australia later in the year. And there's yet to be a decision to be made about that. And other governing bodies are still working through that process. They're deciding how best to proceed. And I guess they're anticipating that even when restrictions are lifted, how could they adapt their competitions? How can they work through the government restrictions, which are changing so quickly, to be in a position to hold the best possible type of competition, whether that's with audiences or without. I think at the moment they're really planning for all contingencies and trying to pick the right time to move forward with the modified season or event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say that we're seeing the same thing in the US and in my area in racing, and that is the same thing as cinema or in sports, Amelia, as you mentioned in Australia, and that is looking at virtual online events. As far as I know, NASCAR here in the US was the first racing body to start racing. They started racing, I believe it was on May 17th or 18th, with no fans. But there's a lot of, as we know, in the contract or in the negotiation and sponsorship world, there's a lot of criteria in contracts. You have your broadcast, you have your ratings, you have your seasons, you have your championship matches or games or events. And all of that now is, well, what do? Do we cancel some of these events? Do we shorten the season? What does that mean for broadcasting, and sponsors and things like that? And those are some things I know we'll get into a little bit later. But, whether it's the virtual online events and trying to keep everybody engaged, or acceleration or expansion of esports, of online lawn sports, still having competition without fans rather than having to, rerun past interesting sporting events. So that's, I think we're seeing a lot of the same here, especially when we have these sporting events, some of which can have 100,000 or more people, for would have been 103 or 104 years of running the Indianapolis 500 here was supposed to be last weekend, and it wasn't. And that's, I believe, the single largest sporting event, attendance in the world of 300,000 plus people. And it's something that's changing right now. That's going to run in August. So one question I do have for Marion, I'll start with you. With the increased online, and you're saying with the cinema, and certainly you have a lot of people, watching cinema, et cetera, have you found issues with broadband or internet accessibility and bandwidth in your negotiations, or is that expanding? Has that been an issue?
Oh, that is an issue. It was an issue before, but now it is the main issue. We got the issue for the negotiations of rights, for example, to know how the platform is working to show, for example, the films. So how the algorithm works, what are the references, how many views they got, to calculate then the remuneration. Until now, we got really a very weak position towards all these companies because they are in a dominant position on this digital market. So it was very difficult to get this information. So there's at least a little bit of transparency. And what we are facing today because of a coronavirus crisis, it is the fact that in Europe, since all the operators which are on this market knew about all these issues, there were two directives. One concerning copyrights and related rights on the digital market, and the other one concerning audiovisual works on the digital market. And all the member states have to transpose these 2 directives at the end of this year for the first one and next year for the second one. For example, in France, because of the coronavirus crisis, we decided to transpose it in the few months to come, because we see that there is a problem for all the operators to get an access, a fair access on the digital market, to get fair clauses on the remuneration, the possibility to get an appropriate and proportional remuneration. Usually when you are facing a platform, they impose on you a lump sum. And you don't know how many views you get once your film is on the platforms. And we never got any information to make sure that your film is on the first page, because it's very interesting to know that during the coronavirus, so how do you say, lockdown? We were locked down, yes, that is the correct word. During the lockdowns, the competition authority in France rendered a decision and compelled and condemned Google to have to enter fair negotiations with publishers. And during this inquiry, it was very interesting to see that if your work is not on the first page of a website, if your film is not on the first page of the Netflix platform, you get no probability to have your film ever be used and shown by a consumer. So it is very important to be on the first page. The probability is that 40–50% of the films on the first page will be really shown, will be used by the consumer. So all these elements of the negotiations are very important. And now, because of the coronavirus crisis, in France, we decided to really impose all these obligations on the digital markets. And it is not only the organizations of IP rights, which are now so involved, it's just the competition authority. And that it changed a little bit the way we worked before, because now we are speaking about abuse of dominant position. So it's more, you know, it's less political, maybe. It's more business-like, but it is a business, and we are speaking about remuneration. So that is in this way that we are moving in Europe. So.
Okay. Thank you, Marion. So instead of fighting for the best position in the supermarket or the best spot where your ad goes, now we're fighting for the first page of the internet or the
exactly. Yes, that is a key issue. Yeah.
So, Amelia, are you seeing any similar issues in Australia or in your practices with issues of competition with bandwidth or first page, etc.?
It's not really been the focus of the discussion in the industry. I think governing bodies had realised the potential of using those kind of platforms before all of this happened. It's quite different depending on which sporting organisation you are. So, you know, the position of power, I guess, in terms of those negotiations is very different for the 5 biggest sport bodies across Australia than it is for those, you know, just as important but not as large sports that don't necessarily have the television broadcast, and so therefore they've needed to work differently in their relationships with the digital providers and platforms, and that really had started to change over the last, I'd say, 5 years. But I honestly think that it hasn't been the highest priority in the things that governing bodies are dealing with. I think it's one of many contingency plans, but I think in Australia, the restrictions are lifting. You know, the number of cases is very small, and people in general, but certainly governing bodies, are starting to to hope for, anticipate for circumstances where there'll be less restrictions. They'll be able to deliver a product which is closer to what it used to be. So I think that's really where a lot of the focus is at the moment. But certainly in Australia, that probably the digital activity and virtual activity has been about keeping connected with the industry audience.
Yeah, I think on the racing side in the U.S., there was before the pandemic, there was the initiatives to involve maybe younger generations of fans who are arguably more focused on their phones or computers or online, from sports that a lot of times find you have large fan bases where you're actually going to the race, and it's not just seeing the race, it's what's associated with the race before the different events. And I think this has probably accelerated that digital platform. And so I think what we're going to see at the end of this, when things change, when things open back up, I think it's going to be different. And I think we're going to have I think a lot of these online initiatives or virtual initiatives are going to continue to to prosper, and then we'll have a kind of a different format. I think we're all going to see that in our areas. So I guess with that, we talked about what governing bodies have done. We talked about in cinema and internet. So what Amelia, I'll start with you this time. What do you think the sport and entertainment sectors can do to help mitigate the economic impact? We know there's been a huge economic impact with cancellations, for example, which has a trickle down effect of different contracts and everything. So Amelia, what do you think can be done to help mitigate these issues?
I think.
Yeah, sorry, Amelia.
Sorry, Marion. You're
No,
right.
no. Yeah.
I think in Australia there's probably two main focuses in that respect. So the first is getting sport, and that's across professional sport, elite sport. So obviously Olympics is now in July 2021. So elite athletes and community sport, recognising that there's an economic contribution from both types of sport, and finding a way to get that back on. So particularly with community sport, the governing bodies are really focused on offering a way that they can conduct their competitions. That's absolutely partly about the economics, partly about the revenue flow through that goes to the different levels of governing bodies in Australia. We have a federated model for most of our sport organisations, so there's often tiered revenue models where a clip of the ticket from community sport goes to the different levels of governing bodies. But it's also really strong focus because of the community wellbeing benefits, the contribution that getting the sport and entertainment sector operating again, to be able to provide the opportunity for people in the community to participate and get the mental health and wellbeing benefits from that, which in turn flow to broader community benefits and ultimately combine that economic contribution with the wellbeing contribution, has been really one of the biggest contributions that sport can make. And it's been recognised by all levels of government in Australia. There's been a lot of support from government, both across funding and resources, but also to work with governing bodies to find a way to facilitate the operation of competitions and events. Yes, they're modified, but it's challenging to work across so for the Australian Football League and the National Rugby League, they've had to work with state governments across multiple states and with the federal government. Each state has different levels of restrictions and different rules about what can be done. All the states at the moment have closed borders, even within Australia. So it's involved significant cooperation, and I think it's really helped everybody see, all the stakeholders, what can be achieved with that level of cooperation, with that level of focus and working together, which I don't really think has been seen before. So I think that that's a really significant contribution. And then the other aspect is contingency planning. So looking forward at how some of the bigger events in Australia might be held in a modified way to contribute to economic impact. So one of our clients is the Victoria Racing Club, and they run the Melbourne Cup Carnival here in Melbourne. So that obviously is a significant sporting event in Australia, but also brings about a significant economic contribution to the city and the state. So if the organisers of these events can find a way to have a modified version, then I think that'll also bring an economic benefit as well.
Amelia, do you see, are there various governing bodies working more, less, or the same together than you've seen in the past?
Much more together. It's been really interesting because I don't think there was ever a governing body who actively did not want to work with others, did not want to work with their peers, but I think everyone was so, they had so many challenges on their plate, so many things to do, so many great products they wanted to promote and create, and how programs they wanted to put in place, that it was difficult for anyone, and I think this probably applies outside of sport as well, but it's difficult for anyone to stop and prioritise working together. But this pandemic has really meant that everybody's had to stop, and it's really shifted the approach that's been taken. So the governing bodies have worked really strongly together to lobby government, which is something that was really needed in Australia, but wasn't done as well as it could have been. And also really to lead solutions, to be able to say to government, this is the solution, this is a way we can run this, or if you provide this amount of funding, this has been at state government level and federal government level, then we can get these programs running, we can facilitate this kind of community sport in this manner. And it's been a really powerful voice that probably hasn't occurred before now in the same way.
Okay, thank you. Marion, what are you seeing in with the cancellations, and as you said, not having theaters anymore, regarding helping mitigating economic impact?
So there are different issues. The first for the producers who finished them film and who cannot have their film being on the screen as usual. So the authority in charge of what we call la chronologie des médias. So it is the theatrical release view. So I understand that is the English translation of this rule, which means that at the beginning, so the film can only be on the screen of the theaters, and then maybe after 4 months on platforms, on video per demand, or yes. So usually it is how it works in order for all the operators to get their money on the film and to have the largest public for any film. Because you are working so with Amelia on the sports issues, and the very big advantage of the sports is that you have the fans. The public is already there. For a producer, so it is a free market, and there's already this meeting between someone who created something and possible public. And the theater does not exist anymore. For the present time, we don't think that it will reopen in the month to come. So that is why this authority said you can have a free access immediately to the platforms to be sure that your film will be exposed. So that is the first measure which was taken. It's a derogation of the rule, which normally applies. And for the rest, as I explained to you, the problem is today that you have negotiations between operators which have a very dominant position on the digital market and all the others who are weak weak on this market. And that is why, and that is very unusual, that the competition authority decided to intervene. Now it's not only the authority in charge of the cinema, the film industry, which will take care of the way the negotiations will be dealt. We are now placing the issues on the competition field to make sure that all this unbalanced situation can be redressed in a way. That is a very, very complicated things to do because, for example, so the government, and it will be the same for all the member states, have imposed on the platforms some obligation to buy European films, to invest in European films. All these obligations which were known to all the audiovisual operators except the platforms. So now it is really a main measure to be taken. So I would like to say that it changed a lot of things on the business market. And just to give you an idea why it is so tense right now on this market in France and in the other member states, each time that you wanted to see a movie on the theater, 50% of the price you paid help the film industry to invest in films coming from Europe or France, which are not standard films. And now we got no revenue at all. That is why all the platforms, Netflix, Amazon Prime, will be compelled to invest if they target member states. So EU member states, for example, which means that for France, Netflix will have, so it is the latest information we got from our government, should invest 50% of the turnover generated in France in the French cinema industry. But all these measures are emergency measures because this unfair competition market, which we already knew, but which was not so enhanced, is now obvious. Because if you don't have a place on this platform markets, as a creator, you get no possibility to have your fans, your people. Yes, so that is all the business model is changing right now.
Yes, I think we're all seeing.
Interesting to see how it will work.
I think it is. I think we're all seeing a lot of changes and a lot of similar things, here, because I mean, we have, certainly you want to keep, as you mentioned, Marion, we have the fans that are part of sports, but we, the different sports, whether it's the governing bodies or the platforms of the teams, they want to keep their fans in their spot and not lose them to another spot. Sometimes, one of the reasons we would have different seasons, whether it's here, if it's baseball or if it's basketball or if it's hockey, et cetera, and some of them overlap. So, one, I think, it's helping mitigate economic by keeping the fans involved. And if those fans are involved with online, even with these reruns I mentioned, where they're rerunning, some famous games or some famous matches, et cetera. And I know my children have been watching many soccer games from way in the past. So, I think it still keeps them involved. Maybe they're still buying merchandise. Maybe the sponsors are still getting, some value. But I mean, we've had in the US, we've had some government subsidies and programs and everything, because let's face it, with sports, especially large sporting events, it's a trickle down. There's effect on hotel revenue. There's effect on restaurant revenue. There's effect on transportation revenue. It all, because a lot of times people travel for these events, and we're seeing it, globally. So, I think it's just trying to at this point stay afloat, keep everything going until things start to open back up, and where different parts of the U.S. are starting that slowly.
Just maybe one thing on this, because we have now facing some proceedings before our courts concerning the insurances, when everything is cancelled. And there has been last week, the Commercial Court of Paris rendered a judgment condemning an insurance to recover the loss of profits because of the lockdown period. And there are many proceedings pending, so which means that we will see how the insurance market will react on this, because the French courts are willing to make the insurances pay for the loss of profit generated by the cancellation of most of events. And on this issue, so the professionals and the operators fear that for the future, the insurance will be huge if they are compelled now because of the decisions rendered to pay and to cover this pandemic risk. So that is something which is under discussions before the courts, and we will see how it works. But we have already a decision now condemning insurances.
And we're seeing very similar here with, at my firm, our insurance group has been very busy. We're seeing it from the insurance side, and, in my practice, my other practice in the bankruptcy side, we're seeing more bankruptcies, where companies are filing for protection, because maybe they can't pay their loans, or, to stop obligations of their contracts. Amelia, are you seeing insurance issues or other similar issues in Australia?
Well, our insurance team is similarly very, very busy. So I think there's certainly an effect. And one interesting observation that one of the partners made to me when we were talking about this is, in any kind of economic downturn, for whatever reason, an insurance practice is generally busier. Perhaps in part because there is particular insurance cover for what's occurred, and that's obviously the pandemic insurance that Marion was referring to, but also because people, when they lose their jobs or have reduced hours and reduced income, are then reactivating claims that had been dormant for some time. It seems to motivate individuals and probably lawyers involved to bring them back on and to reinvigorate the pursuit of them. So I think it's not just an effect in the direct pandemic type insurance, but a much broader impact on insurance. And obviously that does lead to questions about what might occur later in terms of premiums. I think specifically in relation to pandemic insurance in Australia, not very many sports would have had that kind of cover. I was joining a session, a webinar session 2 nights ago, and one of the Tennis Australia, who runs the Australian Open, they were talking about the fact that they had pandemic insurance, so that had certainly put them in a far different position from what they would have been if they didn't have it. But I'd say that that's a small minority in terms of that type of insurance cover in Australia.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, as we kind of get closer to the end of our time, there's kind of 2 more main subjects I wanted to raise. And I think the one thing is that, maybe if we could all share what we've seen with, whether in sports or entertainment, some creative, whether it's online streaming concerts or social media or other examples. So Marion, I'll start with you. What have you seen in your practice that has kind of caught your eye as being very creative?
Creative from our clients have not. Today, the main issue is the negotiations with platforms. So it is not really new. The discussions that we have are the same. The fact that we don't want the exclusivity to license the exclusive rights. So the things which has changed, it is the governmental measures and the intervention of the competition authority, which now is on our side when we are facing such negotiations. That is the main change. But for the rest, we already knew the issues, and but now there are, yes, national authorities which are ready to intervene in the contracts, which is quite unusual because we are all lawyers, jurists, and we know that the contract, it is two willing persons so trying to find a settlement. Now the negotiations will be in a way survey, how do you say, you have an authority which will have an eye on it. And I mentioned last week we got this decision from the competition authority in France concerning negotiations between Google and publishers. Because today it's very difficult, for example, to get any newspaper on paper because we have problems with deliveries. So for all the newspapers, it's important to have an access on internet, and most of the time, everybody is using Google. So it's important for them to be on the first page, the famous first page. And Google said, we will pay nothing, because they use the extracts, you know, of some articles, and they said, no, nothing. And if you want to be paid, we will not show you on the first page. You will not be on the first page. So the publishers filed a claim against the competition authority, and last week the competition authority said it is unfair. And now they forced Google on the negotiations to propose something fair with a fair remuneration, and not only saying no, because we know that now this research process system is necessary to get access to anything. So that is in this way that things are changing.
Thank you. Amelia, what have you seen, you know, kind of in the lockdown of different things or creative things that have been happening, you know, online or in the industry?
Yeah, so a few examples. The V8 supercars over here ran an E-series where they used simulators to have an ongoing championship series with the drivers who would ordinarily be driving in the real life races. And that they were probably the first to get that up in Australia. So that was really, I guess, at the forefront, and there's a lot of talk about that. And I've heard that they will look to continue that in a way. I mean, in addition to their real racing program, but they'll look to, because it was so successful, they'll look to have a virtual racing program as well. The other thing that's really exploded in Australia is online fitness type programs. So, you know, providing opportunities for everyday people in the community who you know, are no longer in fitness centres or no longer able to play the sport that they used to. So one example is one of the leisure centres that we work with set up all of their workout classes online, and initially and at the moment everything was free to really just provide an opportunity for anyone in the public. So you didn't just have to be a member of the fitness centre, but anyone in the public to use that program to take classes. But what they will do and what they intend to do is, when the fitness centre opens again, then they'll turn it into a product where people pay for that. And they've had a huge amount of use of it, a huge amount of take up. So they're really seeing this as an opportunity to drive a new revenue stream, and I think to do that much more quickly than would have occurred if they had if they'd introduced that alongside their physical fitness centre. And I think from a consumer perspective, there'll be a lot more continued use of those kind of digital opportunities. Similarly, some of the sport governing bodies have I guess bolstered existing programs. So Netball Australia had the NetFit program, which was online workshops and programs for netballers, and it existed before, but has really taken off because so many people in the community are looking for ways to get their fitness and to engage with their sport in times where they really can't do that how they traditionally did so. So what's been interesting is a lot of use of the word opportunity. Governing bodies, in some ways are scrambling to stay connected to, generate some revenue to continue to function at a most basic level. But in other ways, they're really taking the opportunity to pivot, taking the opportunity to create or enhance programs that existed and really capture what's quite a captive market in that community space. And so I think what we'll see coming out of it is an increased revenue stream and increased use of that by consumers, which really hastens what Australian sports governing bodies have been talking about, how to create consumer products for how people like to consume sport now, which is very different from the traditional Saturday sport ideas that were really entrenched in the way that we participated in sport in Australia. So there's been lots of exciting and hurried examples, but I think that they do create opportunities for future programs that will be with us for a long time yet.
No, I would agree. I would agree with both you, Amelia, and Marion, the different things that we're seeing. I see, the online fitness is a big thing. I've participated in that, and you can't buy any weights. It's really tough to get weights.
Yes, weights or mats.
Very tough, exactly. Very tough. I see some of my kids, their soccer coaches doing, virtual trainings, one-on-one and in groups. We've had some of the similar virtual racing and some of the series here that you mentioned, Amelia. About a month ago, one of the most interesting things I saw is different concerts or different programs in which bands would get together and they would stream from 4 or 5 of their homes, all coming together, playing their individual instruments in their homes, and the singer singing in his home or her home, and all doing that. So and it coming together, which I just thought was one, very creative and at a level of technology that was pretty stunning. So, I agree. I think a lot of the things that we're seeing now, we would not have seen it anywhere near the level that we're seeing it now, because, it became a necessity since, globally, that we're all, quarantined or locked down, et cetera. And I do think that there's going to be a big shift. I still think there are going to be, brick and mortar, and you're going to go somewhere, because let's face it, especially in the beginning, we're all going to want to get out of the house. But also, I think it's going to allow us to maybe streamline, how we do things and doing things, in your home. So I think that, if we can look positively to the extent we can, there could be some different, positive changes that come out. So, I'd like to kind of end with a last question for everybody, and that is kind of now looking at putting on our lawyer hats. How, I guess, I'll start with you, Amelia, this time. What I'd like to ask of everybody is, maybe just 1 or 2 legal issues, legal points for our viewers that they should be thinking of, or they should be spotting, now and in the future, concerning sport and entertainment for clients, or they should be asking their colleagues in this area, or asking any of us. Our contact information will be available. So what would you say that you've seen or seeing, or you're thinking in the future, for legal items that people should be aware of?
Look, I think in the short term, we've never dealt so much with contractual challenges. And I don't know about you, but honestly, I've never spent so much time looking at force majeure clauses in my life. But I think it's really, that has a short-term impact, and you can advise on the existing contracts. But I think it really reminds us about the importance of planning for unexpected occurrences in the future. Hopefully not another pandemic, but no one had ever really considered this as a serious issue when you were planning a commercial relationship. So I think that's one key focus, is to be looking at how can this best plan for the unexpected, and setting up both parties to do that in a way that will continue to maintain a strong relationship into the future, partly through the contract and partly through the relationships. I guess the other answer is a little bit left field, in that I find we're most effective when we are working with our clients, understanding what they're experiencing, understanding what's going on in the industry, and helping them find a people and culture solution. So helping connect them with the right people. I think it's really important for lawyers. I think the days of us just drafting and then advising on a document are long gone, and we can play a really important role sharing our observations about what's going on in the industry, but also connecting them with experts or connecting them with other sports who have similar experiences and might be looking for a solution that they can find together, that they might be able to work on together. And I think the more that we're doing that, the more that we're working to help facilitate solutions, then we'll have a stronger understanding of the business and industry and their environment, which then puts us, full circle in a really strong position to assist with the legal issues. And there will always be legal issues. So I don't think it's a matter of choosing one over the other. But I think the most helpful we can be and the greatest contribution we can make is to really understand their business, understand their challenges and opportunities, and help facilitate solutions.
Thank you. Marion, what would your legal points be that everybody should be thinking of, what you're saying?
I agree with what Amelia said, because for the media, so most particularly for what we are dealing with in my department, is the films and the conservations of films. Usually, so we used to apply only IP laws because it was really the main subject. And now we have really to understand the entire business model, to have more appraisal of the market, to calculate the market shares, to make more competition law as before. So, and we have really to have this broad view on this market to help, to assist our clients. That is in this way that things are changing with what happened. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, and I would agree with what you said, Amelia, and you said, Marion, as well. I don't think it was left field, Amelia. I've always looked at what I do, especially in the sports or the racing area, as putting people together. As you said, there's always going to be legal work, but being a true partner to your client, understanding their business, helping them meet somebody who maybe be a co-sponsor in something, helping them meet somebody that has similar business or different business models, but coming together makes sense, is part of what we do as lawyers and counselors, is to help our clients and understand their business. So I think that's very important. I think clients remember that, and it allows us to build those trusting relationships with them, that we're not just doing their contracts, we're not just litigating their issues when they're having a problem, but we're helping them expand and grow their business. And I think that's something that creates that great partnership. my other 2 points I had in my notes were, is now that we've had all this online content, and Marion, this goes to a lot of what you were saying in the film and cinema industry, is protecting your online assets. A lot of new and creative things have come out, and they're going to be out there. And once something's on the web, it's always there. So I think it's protecting that, and there's that's going to be important. And lastly, one of the things is that recently came up for me is, I do a lot of sponsorship agreements, and I work with a lot of on the sponsor side. And, in sponsorship agreements, you're looking to see, okay, are you getting the assets that you're bargaining for? Are you getting your hospitality? Are you getting your placement or paint on the car, for example? Are you getting your appearances by the drivers or the athletes? And now, some of that had a shift, and you're right. And force majeure sometimes was a clause in a contract that was probably overlooked more often than not, and now has become very relevant. So I think one of the things is thinking about, okay, well, what's next? What happens if I'm preparing a contract now? What happens if an event that we're looking to sponsor in 6 months goes forth without fans? Well, if there's no fans, what portion of the benefit of your bargain is adversely affected by not having fans, by not having the viewing of people there, by not having the hospitality, not being able to bring the people that you wanted to bring? So I think it's thinking outside of the box on that, and then building in provisions in your agreement so that you can monetize that. Okay, well, if this happens, then it's this, and if this happens, it's that. Because I think one of the best things that we can do as lawyers is counsel and create agreements. So hopefully you never end up litigating. It happens. Just litigation happens. But to the extent that we can prepare agreements, that I think that's important. So,
and I agree with you, and I think there's been a lot of sponsors and leagues and governing bodies working together to recognising that some of the benefits can't be delivered now, but instead of that becoming a dispute, really looking at what alternative benefits could be exchanged, or can we defer the end of the sponsorship agreement so that it actually covers the next season, but then you'll get these other benefits as well. And I think people, for the most part in those negotiations, are all looking for solutions. And it's probably partly about the times that we're in, but it's also testament to the relationships they've built. And I've always said that a contract its most important role is to make sure that you're on the same page, so that you're not having a dispute. So if you can address all of those issues at the start when you're good friends and you both want it to work, then you'll be able to, and that'll help maintain that relationship. And at the other end, when unexpected happens, you're in a really strong position to find a different solution. People are being really creative about that.
Exactly.
Maybe so. In France, what is going on for the contracts because of the cancellations of events? We have a legal supervision in our Code Civil who say that if there is a very big change in the contract because of an event for whose risk nobody accepted the risk, either both parties didn't know about the risk, they did not accept this risk, then both parties have to renegotiate the contract. If they don't find any solution, then the judge can either rescind the contract or change himself the contract. So in France, every operators are so afraid that the judge could readjust and redraft the contract that we try really to find a solution to escape the possibility for a judge to say, oh, I think it was the best solution for both of you, without knowing about the business, without having any. So we fear this issue because of this legal provision that we know and which is provided in the Code Civil. That is why, it leads the parties to find a solution to rebalance the contract because of this risk that nobody accepted because we didn't know.
No, that's exactly right. Sometimes it's better to negotiate than take the risk that a court is going to do something that you nobody contemplated. So Well, Amelia and Marion, I'd like to thank you for, you know, us all getting together at different time zones around the world, and I think this has been a great presentation. I'm hoping that I'm hoping anybody who's viewing this finds value. You know, please, anybody viewing this, if you have questions for Amelia, Marion, or myself, please feel free to reach out to us. You know, I think, you know, introducing our clients, you know, to each other, you know, as they have issues throughout the world and different practice areas is very important, so that we can provide the best service. So, thank you again to Amelia and Marion, and
Thank you.
Thank you.